This week you're going to be working on your literacy narrative, and this is a little bit different than the general narratives that you have probably written before, the personal story, the thing that has happened to you. This is specifically about something in writing or reading that has changed your life. So let's talk a little bit about that. First off, what the narrative is not. This narrative is again very different. So a narrative, when most people think of them as is a story. It's something about you, something that's going on. So this is not a short story. Please do not write a short story. While I do enjoy reading a good short story, this needs to be a real event, something that has happened to you, something that is specific to your life. This is definitely not fiction. So please don't take a story that has happened and then change some events. This needs to be a real life event. This is also not a journal. This is not a thing where you write about how your day is going or how your day went. This is not a time to just bleed out all of your feelings and your thoughts. This needs to be focused on a specific thing. This is also not a blog, so this means that you're not writing this is not where you're writing where it's very informal. This needs to be a specific thing where you are giving some really good and strong details. So what is a literacy narrative? So a literacy narrative basically is a personal story. This is your personal story about how something in your life has changed. So it's something that is important to you. It really means something specific to you. It's not like just a little tiny thing that it has changed your life. It's something that is important to you. And it needs to be a significant experience. So this is not just at something that's important to you, but something big that is important to you, significant, something in your life that really is almost world changing for you personally. This one, because it's a literacy narrative, is about reading. Maybe reading has changed your life in some way, or you have learned something specific from your reading. Maybe you've learned about automotive repair and it's changed your life about how you want to follow through with automotive repair. Or maybe you're reading a lot about sports figures and made you want to consider sports journalism as a career. So think about that as you are selecting your topic. Or it can be about writing. Maybe something in your life that um, is important to you has affected you in such a way that you just felt you had to write about it, and it changed your life because of this new direction with writing that you are entering into. So it's either about reading or about writing, or it could be about learning a skill. As I mentioned, maybe talking you have read a lot about um, the automotive trade, and you're learning about how things in the automotive trade are interesting to you, and so you are learning the skill about how to write about learning this trade. So there's a few different things you can do. There's more examples in your textbook, so take a look at those. But remember, it does need to be a personal story. So as you're beginning this, you're going to need to do some brainstorming before you start. Brainstorming is a good way to just begin your story. It's a way to think about how the the story that you want to tell is going to be important. So think about something that is important, something that's life changing. And then just take some time, piece of paper or on your computer, write as many details as possible. The details could be things that you're going to cut out later, but write as many things as you can remember, as many details about this literacy event that has happened to you, and just continue writing until you have run out of ideas or you've made your hand hurt because you've written for so long. Or you could do some free writing. That means taking a topic. So let's say that you're writing something, you want to free write about something specific, and you're going to take a short story that changed your life. So you're going to write about The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. And you just take that as your topic, and just write through as much as you can about um, the cask of Amontillado and maybe how that changed your life. You could do this as talking to yourself, so you can write it down like a little conversation. You could write down what you would say to yourself in this certain situation, and just have a conversation with yourself. It's kind of weird. It can be kind of weird, but as you're working on it, it's a way to get the ideas flowing. You can also create a word cloud. I'm sure you've seen these word clouds before. Things that you start in the middle and you just make connections with different words. Here's an example of what a word cloud can look like. This is a word cloud that is using a algorithm that is showing the most used words in a specific thing. But this word cloud can give you some examples on how words are connected and how they are used throughout a different story. Then as you're writing, you need to focus on the details. What sticks out to you? What is the most important thing? And you definitely need to be concrete in what you're writing about, but don't go overboard. Don't be so detailed that you're talking about different things in a specific manner. Let's take a look at this peacock. So this peacock right here, this is a detailed picture. This is giving a lot of information. We can see the grass underneath this peacock. We can see the blue of the body. We can see the beak. We can see all of these different feathers. There's all of these different things. There's a lot of details here, and that's great. It's a good image, but it might be too general. So let's go a little bit more specific, and you can see, look how closely this image, how this close-up of this image changes just because of how you get a little bit more detailed. So this little image is one of these little eyelets or whatever. I don't know what these are called, but see how closely this changes things. So with your details, you need to be as specific as possible, but definitely don't go overboard. Don't paint yourself into a corner by giving just these specific details, but also don't paint yourself in a corner by giving a wide range of details. You got to think about what to write. And as you're doing that, you're going to have to take some time and just pay attention to what is important to you, really. That is what's going on. That's what you need to focus on. So let's take a look at some key features of this literacy detail. What would be things that you could be important, that would be important to you that you could focus on. So you need to make sure that you are telling interesting stories. That's the important part, is that it is interesting. And I'm going to be frank with you. There's people aren't going to want to read a story about you reading a story to your sister, unless you are saying how you reading a story to your sister has changed your life in a specific way. It made you closer to your sister. It brought you guys closer together, and then because of that, you now share stories with each other all the time. So the literacy narrative will also give some specific details. It'll tell what is you are writing about and what this specific writing event or reading event or learning event has been important in your life, how it has been important. And it also invites the reader in. You're not just telling a story, you're inviting somebody to say, hey, come over, sit next to me. I have to tell you this story. Come over, we're gonna talk about this. I'm gonna tell you this story. It's gonna be something that you're gonna really care about. And so you need to invite your reader in. You need to make sure that as you're doing that, you're not alienating them by telling something that is so personal to you that people might feel either uncomfortable reading it, or they might be a little shy with the content because it's such a personal story. They don't want to mess with it. As you're working on it, think about what you were thinking during this time period. If you're talking about writing a story about how you were reading to your sister and how it was a big event in your life, then what were you thinking during that time? Is there something that you would change? Would you have chosen a different book? Would you have had a different attitude? Maybe your mom told you had to read to your sister, and you'd I really don't want to, so you put it off for a little while. Maybe you would have decided to read to her sooner. Think about the impressions that you have gotten or you're giving. Are there any impressions that were laid upon you as you were doing your literacy narrative? Is there anything that was so important to you that it laid an impression on your heart? Think about how you got there. How did you get to where you were? How did you get to the place in the story that it was the time for this narrative to begin? So basically what you're doing is writing a historical account with personal knowledge. This is your personal story. This is your narrative about how reading or writing or learning a new skill has changed your life. And this, again, is a specific event. It's not a general sweeping through time. Don't start in the beginning of time. I have hated writing, but I changed that because of this one event. Don't go with that. Don't don't go starting with way back in time. Start the event right away. Start describing the specific event right away. So as with every writing that we do in this class, there's a very good writing process that you should follow. So I suggest that you begin with brainstorming. And I like to do my brainstorming on paper. It's hard for me to sit at a computer and just start typing brainstorming because you might want to draw different things. You might want to make connections, and those are hard to make on a computer. And having something, as I've said before, having a piece of paper in your hand, it helps to solidify the idea stronger within your hand. And you need to think about what you want to say, and you need to get that down. You need to get that down before you begin writing the paper. Don't figure out what you want to say by paragraph 3 or 4. You need to figure out what you want to say before you even start the introduction. So after you have done your brainstorming, you need to get specific quickly. I suggest that you outline. What you need to do is outline the whole paper. Find your thesis. Find your main points. See where they connect. And then see how they all connect to one another. Make sure that you're staying on topic. And then you want to write an interesting introduction. Make sure that the opening sentence grabs your attention. Is it an interesting statement or is it an anecdote? You need to make sure you're starting very, very strongly. You could start with a climactic event and then go back to the beginning of the narrative. You could be a thought-provoking statement, things that have gotten into your mind, and this is something that is important. Make sure your introduction provides enough detail so your readers cannot get lost. They're going to feel well grounded within it. Make sure there's a personality in it. This is an essay, yes. This is an academic paper, yes. But there has to be a good tone. There has to be some personality. Make sure it flows smoothly. Make sure you're working on those transitions correctly. And also, importantly, as you're working in it, make sure that you stay within your grammar rules. Follow the grammar rules. Again, if somebody really wants to make the writing better, they need to hear the writing out loud. So maybe have that friend read it to you. Maybe you read it out loud to yourself. Then what you need to do is start writing. That's going to be the thing that really gets you moving toward this. Maybe you need to set a writing goal. Set a writing goal of a specific number of words or pages that you're going to write, or a specific time. I suggest, because this is a narrative, this is your story, take a time to write your first draft in one sitting. This will help you to tell your story, make sure it's cohesive, make sure it is a strong story from beginning to end. And then what you want to do is, after you've done your first draft, you want to revise it. You know what you're going to do? You're going to rewrite it. And then what are you going to do? You're going to reread it. And then, you know what you're going to do? Yep, you're going to revise it, rewrite it, reread it, and keep this process going until you have written your paper and it's as strong as possible. Because this is your personal story. This is something that you want people to know about you. So here's some general writing tips that I have for you with this personal narrative, this literacy narrative. You need to make sure that you keep your story moving. And what that means is just sometimes you got to cut out the boring parts. Alfred Hitchcock said that a good story is just life with the boring parts cut out. So cut out the boring parts. Remove any of the things that don't move the story forward. Maybe they are talking about a process or something, but they might not be the most interesting thing. So cut out the boring parts. Remove any extra words that you have. Definitely do not show off your vocabulary. There, this is a something that would sound like you are telling a story. So don't show off your vocabulary. Don't get out your thesaurus and look for the dollar words when a nickel word will do. Make sure that you're writing easily. Just take it so it's flowing from you. And then definitely rewrite often. Some people like to rewrite the whole thing at once. Some people like to rewrite sentences. Some people just go with paragraphs or topics. So you need to rewrite often as you're working on this. And as you're doing this, the story will flow from you very well. So let me take a minute to tell you about my personal narrative, my personal literacy narrative. This isn't going to take long, and this is something that you might want to do in your own writing. So I was interested in story. From sixth grade, fifth grade, I was just interested in the way stories were told. I like to watch television, but I didn't watch it just for the shows. I liked to watch it for what was going on in the story, what was happening, how was the story flowing, was there when did the jokes come if I was watching a sitcom or something, when did the story really take traction. So I was interested in looking at it, but I didn't know how to tell a story, and I didn't want to read. So I didn't want to focus on the way that people have already told a story. I didn't want to read because everything that I had been given to me in reading was something that was forced upon me in a reading or in an English class. And I definitely didn't like to write. Writing was something that it just was a pain to me. I really did not like to write at all. So I couldn't even unpack how a story was told because I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to write it. I didn't want to do any of this stuff. And then in sixth grade, I was starting to mess around with some writing. I wrote my first play in sixth grade. It was not great. I think I wrote it on a piece of paper. It's gone to the trash probably of my sixth grade English teacher because we had to write a play in the class. And I was learning about writing a little bit, but I still didn't want to read. So as I was going through, I started realizing that movies that I like to watch were sometimes based on a book. And so I would watch a movie and then I would watch the credits at the beginning, see written by so and so, based on the novel by so and so. And I discovered that one of my favorite movies at that time, it was Jurassic Park, was written by a man named Michael Crichton. And so I discovered that Michael Crichton existed, that he had written many stories. So I bought Jurassic Park or got it for Christmas or my birthday or something. And I decided I was going to read it. This was going to be the book that I learned about writing from. And to be honest, as I was reading it, I just didn't have the stamina or the background to really read a whole book like that, because up to that point I had only read short pieces, and Jurassic Park was a really long novel for me at that age. So it took me a couple of years before I would really read. But when I finally was sitting down, when I finally had a lot of time, I picked up Jurassic Park again, and I devoured that book. I read it, and it changed who I was inside, because the story, it just flowed so well. There was a way that he told the story throughout the whole book. There was different things that happened at different times, and it really made the movie, which was good, come alive a little bit more. And it even detracted from the movie, saying, you know what, they could have made it that much better by following this storyline. And so I read everything that I possibly could by Michael Crichton. I picked up all of his different books, and I would read them and learn more about them. And then as I grew more and more, I would find, oh, this writer is mentioned in the thanks of Michael Crichton's book, so I'll check out that writer, and then I'll check out this writer. And before I knew it, I was interested in story, but now I was knowing how to tell a story, and I wanted to read, and I loved to write because I could see how the story was unfolding, and I started writing, and I wrote a comic strip, and I wrote a comic book, and I wrote a play, and I wrote some short films, and I wrote some short stories, and I wrote a novel, and then I got into grad school, and then it just steamrolled into that, and that is my personal literacy narrative, and how learning about something as small as reading, discovering an author, it changed my life. So, lastly, as you're doing this, you see that this story was really important to me, so I enjoyed telling you this story. So, as you're writing through this, just sit down, write your stuff, and definitely enjoy the ride. Because when you are writing and you're not enjoying it, your readers are going to be able to tell.